What makes someone a serial killer? It's one of the darkest and most disturbing questions we can ask about human nature, and also one of the most compelling. The idea that an ordinary human being can commit multiple murders, often with calculation, cruelty, or ritual, challenges everything we want to believe about society, morality, and the human mind. Serial killers fascinate and terrify us precisely because they force us to look at the furthest edges of human behavior. To understand them, we have to go deep into psychology, into trauma, into brain science, and into the darker corners of human motivation. Serial killers have been around far longer than the term itself. The phrase serial killer wasn't popularized until the late 20th century, but history is full of figures who fit the description. Individuals who commit multiple murders over a period of time, often with a psychological compulsion or ritualistic pattern. These are not crimes of passion committed in a single burst of rage. They are calculated, repeated acts. They are chilling, in part because they involve intent and repetition. Psychologists and criminologists define a serial killer as someone who commits 3 or more murders over an extended period, with a cooling-off period between each crime. This separates them from mass murderers, who kill multiple victims in a single event, and spree killers, whose killings occur over a short time without breaks. The cooling-off period is critical because it shows something unique about the psychology of serial killers. Their crimes are not just functional, but psychological. They return to ordinary life between murders, and then something inside them drives them to do it again. What drives them is one of the most complex questions in forensic psychology. No single cause explains every case. Instead, what we see is a web of psychological, biological, and environmental factors that interact in unique ways in each individual. But there are patterns. One of the most commonly discussed factors is early childhood trauma. Many serial killers share histories of neglect, abuse, or severe instability in their formative years. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, or emotional neglect during early development can distort how a person forms attachments, understands empathy, or experiences power. This doesn't mean every abused child becomes a killer, far from it. But it does mean that traumatic early experiences can lay the groundwork for personality structures that, in extreme cases, contribute to violent behavior. Some experts describe this process through the lens of attachment theory. Children who grow up in stable, loving environments typically develop secure attachment, which allows them to build healthy relationships and regulate emotions. Those who grow up in chaotic, abusive, or neglectful environments may develop disorganized or avoidant attachment styles. These can lead to profound emotional detachment, lack of empathy, and difficulty relating to others as fully human. In some individuals, especially those with other risk factors, this detachment can grow into something dangerous. Another factor often seen in the backgrounds of serial killers is head trauma or neurological abnormalities. Research has found correlations between damage to the frontal lobes or temporal lobes of the brain and impulsive or violent behavior. The frontal lobe plays a key role in decision-making, impulse control, and moral reasoning. When it's damaged, whether from accidents, abuse, or genetic anomalies, an individual may struggle to regulate impulses or feel guilt. This doesn't make someone a killer by itself, but in combination with other vulnerabilities, it can increase risk. Psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder are also central to the psychology of many serial killers. Psychopathy is characterized by a lack of empathy, shallow emotions, manipulativeness, and a tendency toward impulsive or criminal behavior. Not all psychopaths are violent. Many live relatively ordinary lives, though often leaving a trail of interpersonal harm. But among serial killers, psychopathic traits are disproportionately common. The combination of emotional detachment and manipulative charm can make these individuals capable of hiding their intentions and blending into society. It's important to distinguish between psychopathy and psychosis. Psychopathy is a personality structure, often without delusions or hallucinations. Psychosis involves breaks from reality, such as hearing voices or holding irrational beliefs. While some serial killers have psychotic disorders, most do not. They are frightening precisely because they are often rational. They plan, they choose, and they know exactly what they are doing. That clarity of intention makes their crimes especially chilling. Another layer to understanding serial killers is fantasy. Many serial killers begin with violent fantasies long before they act. These fantasies may involve control, domination, revenge, or sexual violence. Over time, the fantasies intensify, sometimes becoming rehearsals for real actions. Psychologists call this the fantasy rehearsal model. The killer mentally rehearses the act, often deriving gratification from the fantasy itself. But eventually, for some individuals, fantasy is no longer enough, and they act on it. Control is often at the center of these fantasies. Many serial killers are driven not simply by a desire to kill, but by a need to assert power over their victims. This is why some killings involve elaborate rituals, binding, torture, or post-mortem actions. These acts are not random. They are expressions of psychological needs. To feel powerful, to play out internal dramas, to dominate. In some cases, these rituals are tied to sexual arousal, creating a dangerous reinforcement loop where violence and gratification become psychologically linked. Serial killers are often categorized based on their motivations and patterns. One common classification system divides them into visionary, mission-oriented, hedonistic, and power control killers. Visionary killers are driven by psychotic beliefs. They may think God, the devil, or some other entity is commanding them to kill. Mission-oriented killers believe they are purging the world of undesirables, acting out a distorted moral crusade. Hedonistic killers derive pleasure from the act itself, whether through sexual satisfaction, excitement, or sadism. Power control. Killers seek to dominate and control their victims completely, often reliving their crimes through trophies or souvenirs. Not every killer fits neatly into these categories, and some blend elements from several. But these frameworks help psychologists and law enforcement understand their drives and patterns. For example, hedonistic and power control killers often have long periods of fantasy and planning, while visionary killers may act more impulsively. Understanding these distinctions can help investigators predict behavior and prevent future crimes. Another critical aspect of serial killer psychology is their ability to mask themselves. Many are not socially isolated maniacs lurking in the shadows. Some are charismatic, charming, and seemingly ordinary. This mask of normalcy is sometimes called the mask of sanity, a phrase coined by psychiatrist Hervey Cleckley to describe psychopaths who appear normal but lack genuine emotion. Many notorious serial killers held jobs, maintained relationships, and moved unnoticed through their communities. This ability to blend in allows them to evade detection for years. The social and cultural context can also play a role in how serial killers emerge and operate. Times of social upheaval, weak law enforcement systems, or high mobility can create opportunities for serial offenders to act without being caught. Advances in forensic technology have made it harder for serial killers to evade detection today than in the past, but they have not eliminated the phenomenon entirely. Forensic psychologists often look for what's known as the homicidal triad in childhood histories, though it's a controversial and oversimplified concept. This triad includes chronic bedwetting past a certain age, cruelty to animals, and fire-setting behavior. While not predictive on its own, when combined with other signs of antisocial behavior, it can indicate underlying psychological distress or conduct disorders that may develop into more serious pathology if untreated. Another theme in serial killer psychology is escalation. Rarely does someone begin by committing serial murder out of the blue. There's often a progression: early fantasies, minor offenses, perhaps cruelty to animals or non-lethal violence, then escalating to murder. This gradual build-up allows the person to test boundaries, refine methods, and become desensitized to violence. Media coverage of serial killers has also shaped public perception. Movies, TV shows, and news stories often sensationalize these individuals, giving them nicknames and building narratives around their crimes. While the fascination is understandable, the human mind is drawn to extremes. This media attention can sometimes distort the reality of serial killer psychology. It can make them appear more like criminal masterminds or monsters than they often are. Many are not geniuses. Many are disorganized, impulsive, or sloppy. But media narratives can also feed into the killer's own fantasies of power and notoriety. Psychological studies have found that many serial killers score high on measures of narcissism. They crave attention, admiration, or control over how they are perceived. Some correspond with the media or police, seeking to taunt or manipulate public fear. This narcissism often combines with a lack of empathy, creating individuals who both want to be feared and feel no genuine remorse for the suffering they cause. Not all serial killers are men, though men make up the majority. Female serial killers often operate differently. While male serial killers are more likely to use overt violence, female serial killers are more likely to use less direct means, such as poisoning or smothering, often in domestic or caregiving contexts. Their motives also often differ, sometimes involving financial gain or perceived mercy, rather than sadistic gratification, though exceptions exist. This difference in pattern is part of why female serial killers are sometimes harder to detect. Biological factors have been a focus of modern research. Some studies have found differences in brain structure and function among violent offenders. Reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, which regulates impulse control, and overactivity in the amygdala, which governs fear and aggression, have been observed. Hormonal and neurotransmitter imbalances, particularly involving serotonin and dopamine, may also play a role in regulating aggression and impulse control. However, these biological findings are only pieces of a larger puzzle. Biology may create vulnerabilities, but environment and psychology shape outcomes. One of the most chilling aspects of serial killers is their lack of remorse. While many violent offenders express guilt or shame after their actions, serial killers often do not. Some rationalize their behavior through distorted beliefs. Others simply don't care. This emotional void is often a hallmark of psychopathy. Their understanding of other people tends to be instrumental, seeing others not as fellow human beings, but as objects to be used, controlled, or destroyed. The distinction between organized and disorganized offenders is another useful psychological framework. Organized offenders tend to plan their crimes carefully, select victims deliberately, and take steps to avoid detection. They may follow media, coverage, and even insert themselves into investigations. Disorganized offenders, by contrast, act impulsively, leaving chaotic crime scenes and being more easily caught. This distinction can help criminal profilers understand behavioral patterns and predict future actions. Despite our fascination with serial killers, it's important to emphasize that they are extremely rare. Most violence is not committed by serial offenders, but their rarity is part of why they capture so much attention. They represent a kind of moral and psychological outlier, a reminder that extreme behavior can exist within ordinary communities. The investigation of serial crimes often involves criminal profiling, a field that blends psychology, criminology, and investigative experience. Profilers look at crime scene evidence, victimology, and behavioral patterns to build psychological portraits of unknown offenders. While profiling is not an exact science and has its critics, it has helped identify behavioral consistencies among certain types of offenders, aiding investigations. Psychological intervention and prevention are complex. There is no single test that can identify future serial killers, and most people who exhibit some risk factors never commit serious violence. Early intervention in cases of severe childhood trauma, conduct disorders, or antisocial behavior can reduce risk. Mental health support, stable environments, and treatment for at-risk youth are far more effective than any attempt to predict future killers. Some serial killers claim their actions were driven by ideology, compulsion, or even supernatural beliefs. Others admit they simply enjoyed the sense of control or power. Many are incapable of giving a satisfying explanation even to themselves. Understanding their psychology does not excuse their crimes, but it helps us understand how such extreme behavior can arise from complex interactions of mind, brain, and environment. Modern forensic science has made serial murder harder to sustain undetected. DNA databases, digital surveillance, and improved interagency cooperation have closed many of the loopholes that allowed past killers to operate for years. However, understanding the psychology remains essential, not just for catching killers, but for preventing their emergence in the first place. There's also the question of whether serial killers are born or made. Most experts agree it's not a simple either-or. Genetic predispositions, brain differences, and personality traits interact with environmental stressors like trauma, abuse, and social context. It is the combination, not one single factor, that can create the conditions for serial killing to emerge. Understanding serial killers also forces us to reflect on empathy itself. Most people are wired to feel empathy for others. Hurting someone else feels wrong and creates emotional discomfort. In serial killers, this empathy system is either severely underdeveloped or entirely absent. Studying why helps us better understand how empathy functions in normal brains and why its absence is so dangerous. Serial killers also often exhibit what's called paraphilias, a typical sexual interest that in their case can become intertwined with violence. Not all paraphilias are violent or criminal, but when combined with psychopathy or sadism, they can contribute to dangerous behavior patterns. Sexual sadism, in particular, is overrepresented among sexually motivated serial killers. Their victims are often chosen based on availability and vulnerability. Many target marginalized groups, sex workers, runaways, or individuals living on the fringes of society, because these victims are less likely to be missed quickly or thoroughly investigated. This grim reality underscores how social factors can influence criminal behavior. It also raises questions about whose lives society values and protects. Their psychology often includes an inflated sense of self-importance, believing themselves to be smarter or more powerful than everyone else. These traits mirror narcissistic and antisocial personality features common in psychopathy. Forensic psychology also examines the role of early warning signs, sometimes called red flags. These can include cruelty to animals, fascination with death, lack of empathy, and a history of escalating violence. However, these signs are not diagnostic on their own. Many children who exhibit some behavioral problems do not grow up to commit violent crimes. Context and escalation are key factors. Society's fascination with serial killers often leads to mythologizing them, turning them into larger-than-life figures. But it's crucial to remember that most are not criminal geniuses or supernatural monsters. They are profoundly damaged individuals who exploit opportunities and vulnerabilities. Understanding their psychology demystifies them and gives us tools to protect potential victims and communities. Some experts also highlight the role of fantasy consumption, including violent pornography, sadistic media, or other reinforcing materials. While consuming such media does not cause violence in most people, in individuals already predisposed to violent fantasies, it can intensify their internal narratives. Over time, these narratives can become obsessions. Serial killers may also develop rituals or signatures that have personal meaning. These behaviors go beyond what's necessary to commit the crime. They might position the body a certain way, take trophies, or leave marks. These signatures reflect their inner psychological world and often provide clues to investigators about their motivations or personality. Many serial killers experience a kind of psychological high after their crimes. This rush reinforces the behavior, creating a cycle of tension, release, and craving similar to addiction. Over time, the intervals between killings may shorten as the individual seeks that high more frequently. This cycle is one reason serial killers can be so persistent and difficult to stop without external intervention. Ultimately, serial killing is the convergence of several factors: psychological vulnerabilities, environmental influences, social context, and sometimes biological predispositions. It is not about one single cause. And while the public often seeks clear explanations, the reality is complex. Understanding these complexities helps law enforcement, psychologists, and communities develop better tools for early intervention, prevention, and investigation. It also helps remove some of the sensationalism that surrounds these crimes. Serial killers are not mythical monsters. They are human beings, terrifyingly human beings, whose minds developed in profoundly destructive ways. By studying them, we don't glorify them. We learn to recognize warning signs, strengthen protective factors in society, and confront the uncomfortable truth that human nature contains both incredible compassion and unimaginable cruelty. That duality is what makes the study of serial killer psychology both horrifying and essential. The darkness they embody doesn't exist in a vacuum. It reflects, in twisted form, the vulnerabilities, desires, and flaws present in all human beings. By shining a light on those extremes, we better understand the boundaries of our own humanity and how to protect it.